Super excited to introduce Jane Rayburn, who is an amazing friend and a pollster, and she lives on the South Shore. She lives in Cohasset, and I think this is probably the busiest time of her 2-year election cycle. So the fact that she took time out tonight to speak with us is super exciting. And she has this amazing network of candidates throughout the country, and she's reached out to them, and they have agreed to drop in tonight with some videos, and took time out from their busy campaign schedules to kind of talk to us very briefly about the impact of out-of-state calls on their races. So I think we're gonna start out with Mo Davis from North Carolina, and then we'll kick it over to Jane so she can kick off her presentation.
Hey, South Shore Democrats. It's Mo Davis from Western North Carolina's 11th Congressional District here in the beautiful North Carolina Appalachian Mountains. I want to thank you for all those out-of-state calls you're making on behalf of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It's having a big impact. Here in Western North Carolina, we just did polling, and our polling shows the Biden-Harris ticket up, which if they're winning here in Western North Carolina, it bodes well for North Carolina as a whole. It helps me as well. I mean, lifting up the top of the ticket helps those of us down ballot in our races too. And I'm running against a 25-year-old Nazi cozy multimillionaire who's never had a job, who thinks that women need men to tell them what to do. And your work is helping me as well to help women on November 3rd tell him what he can go do. So I'm grateful to you for all your hard work, and you got to keep at it. We're in the home stretch, but we've got to sprint all the way to the finish, and we can celebrate on November 4th. So thanks again, and come visit Western North Carolina.
So without further ado, here's Jane Rayburn.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, everyone. It's really a treat to be with y'all tonight. As Chris said, I also live here on the South Shore, so it truly is exciting for me to get to talk to all of y'all about what we're seeing nationally in the race. Definitely tonight I'm going to talk about a lot of national things, but I was excited to see Megan Sam here on tonight's call. That's a super competitive race that's happening here right in Massachusetts. So lots of work to do in our backyard as well. But with that, I'm going to talk to y'all a little bit about what we're seeing nationally. I'm going to share my screen, but Chris, can you please make me a host? While we're doing that, what we're going to talk about tonight is just some national data that we've been seeing, and I'm happy to talk with y'all a little bit about what we're seeing in our own internal polling. I work for a firm called EMC Research, based out of Boston, but in COVID times here on the South Shore. I'm also connected to our DC office, so I do a lot of federal level work that I'm excited to talk to you guys about. Typically we're on the hard side or the IE side, so there might be some things that I'm not able to share or answer, but I will talk to y'all about what I can. So, this election, I think we're all tired of hearing these terms, unprecedented, like never before, the most impactful election of our lifetime. But truly, that is what we're seeing, and there's so much interesting stuff that's happening across the country that we can talk a little bit about. As I mentioned, I work for a firm called EMC Research. I'm connected to our DC office, but based right here in Massachusetts. We have multiple offices across the country, so we really have a good look at what's happening, not just in our own backyard here in Massachusetts, or even federally, but truly in many different places across the country. These are just some of the folks that we work for. I'm really proud of the work that we've done for organizations like the ACLU. I've had the privilege of working with Kim, who's also on the call today. I'm sure she'll talk to you more about the Roe Act. And we've worked with a smattering of elected officials and other advocacy organizations across the state. We have multiple sitting members of the legislature on both the House and Senate side, several sitting mayors. Including Julian Sear out on the Cape, as well as some other folks too. So, we're excited to be here with you guys tonight. So I think this is really the question that most folks have asked me when they, want to talk about polling and what we've seen across the country is, how did we get here? I certainly could wax poetic about, institutional racism and the patriarchy, but I won't spend all of Chris's meeting talking about that. But truly, we really have seen, typically in the past, one of the biggest markers of how folks voted was actually their religious affiliation. And now more than anything, it's become partisanship. You can see that over time, public officials, their perception of public officials has really changed in the eyes of the public. Dating back into the 50s and 60s, you can see that folks really disagreed with that statement, that they felt that public officials did care about what people think, and used that to inform the way that they legislated and campaigned. But if you fast forward to 2016, you can see that's quite a large gap that's opened up. And when we do this opinion research among voters, more than 50% of folks, feeling almost over 60% that public officials don't care what people think. That disagreement level has dropped all the way under 20%. At the same time, when you ask folks if they feel, would you say that the government is run pretty much by a few big interests looking out for themselves, or is it run for the benefit of all the people? The few big interests has really waxed and waned over the years. You can see in 02, it was basically equal, right about 50% on each side. But now we've seen this truly sharp decline, under 20% in 2016, saying that the government is run for the benefit of all people. So those two things in combination, when we think about public sentiment, we think about the way that people vote, folks don't feel that, public officials care about what they think, and they think that the government is run by a few big interests. So really, we've entered one of the most partisan and polarized elections, certainly of my lifetime, and probably of many of yours as well. So what does that mean for 2020? The mood of the electorate is truly, again, unprecedented. I'll use lots of cliched terms here in this presentation, so hang in there with me. But we see that in general, folks are feeling very pessimistic across the country. 62%, nearly 2/3, saying that they think that things are heading in the wrong direction. You can see some major peaks here. This is including, all of COVID, essentially. So you can see election day in 2018, as we had that blue wave, we picked up the House. You can see that right direction, wrong track narrowing, and then slowly opening up as COVID has spread throughout the country, down to impeachment. And once Trump is impeached and COVID, starts to hit, heading into March and April, you can really see that sentiment starting to open back up. The electorate becomes much more pessimistic. This is also traditionally true of election years, but we're really seeing it this year. And certainly some major spikes around nationwide protests for racial justice. Once we see that the president has reveals that he's tested positive for COVID-19, some of the biggest spikes of this cycle all happening as the election continues to approach. So, we've got an electorate that feel like their elected officials don't care about them, that it's controlled by big interests, and a pretty pessimistic electorate overall when they think about the direction that the country is trending. There was at some point, there's this backdrop, right? When we're talking about politics right now, it's totally unavoidable, even though it may feel for some of you, it certainly does for me. I just got invited to an in-person meeting earlier today, and I was like, wait, what world are we living in here? But while it may feel as though coronavirus is truly tapering off, certainly there are lots of hypotheticals about what could happen here as we enter into the winter months. You can see that over time, folks slowly started to feel in August as though it was getting better. And then, really there's just been this big drop off. So there was optimism about the pandemic that ended in June. Pessimism has been on the decline as people continue to, really become tired of it. But a majority of folks still believe that our disruptions to daily life will continue to last at least for the rest of the year, if not longer. So we really do have a maelstrom of sentiment that's happening right now, and that's really translating into approval ratings at the top of the ticket. There's been a lot of ink spilled about Trump's approval rating. And where he's at a majority disapprove. This is not necessarily super atypical. You can see his approval rating right now is sitting at 46%. This is historical approval rating over time. So you can see Barack Obama and at the end of his second term was at a 49% approval rating. There are other incumbents who won re-election. Trump's approval rating is lower than those folks, but the incumbents who lost, particularly one-term presidents, George H.W. Bush and Jimmy Carter, they were in the 30s. So Trump is quite a bit higher than where both Carter and Bush were at the end of their fourth year, right before they lost re-election to a second term. So, historically, while this looks good, when you put it in context, Trump is actually overperforming a little bit when we look at those approval ratings. So certainly, as you've already heard tonight, our work is not done as we push forward through these last 14 days, even in the wake of a global pandemic and everything else that's been happening in our country this year and for the last 4 years. When we look at the comparison of Clinton and Biden over the last 2 election cycles, this is where things do start to look more favorably for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Biden's favorable rating over Trump, so the net amount that he's viewed more favorably by voters than Donald Trump is higher at this point out 14 days away from the election than Hillary Clinton's was in 2016. So, there's, like I said, been a lot of ink spilled about her favorable rating being much lower at this point. And that's true. Certainly at this point in time, we did see a spread of a couple points here where her favorable rating was underperforming compared to his. So we've got all of the scenes set for the top of the ticket. We know that it's so important. We have this maelstrom of an electorate, and we have, Biden performing better when we look at those favorable ratings. But that's not all we have to look at as we head into 2020 here. Currently Democrats don't hold the Senate, as I'm sure we all know, and there's quite a bit of room to grow. We do have 12 seats roughly that are up, that are either safe Democrat or lean Democrat, and then there's additional 7 seats, some of which we will need to pick up in order to take the Senate. One is in our own backyard up here in Maine, so I encourage you to get involved in that where you can. Certainly I think that'll be one of the bellwethers for what will happen nationwide here. But then we have some other states in play when it comes to the Senate that historically have been, Republican leaning or really more difficult pickups for Democrats. I'm not sure if anyone saw the viral video that went around recently about Joni Ernst being asked the price of soybeans. If you missed it, do a Google. It's truly remarkable. But Georgia's in play. North Carolina is in play. There's been a lot happening there as well on both sides of the aisle. And then one that I'm most excited to look at, Jamie Harrison and Lindsey Graham. This is in play. Trump won South Carolina by 14 points in 2016. But the most recent polling, and just with a wink and a nod, I'll say I heard a little rumor that internals are confirming this as well. Jamie Harrison up by a point in the polls. So, it's possible that we see places that are deep red, including Alabama, Doug Jones and his reelection, who was thought that he would lose, that he's up by a point as well. So, there's lots of these seats that are possible flips and pickups, and something to keep our eye on as, we continue to engage. And I skipped right over the House. We've already heard from Mo Davis tonight, but there are a couple different places as well. Currently Democrats hold the House. It'll be important to do that for checks and balances should we have another Trump administration. However, there are some seats that we need to hold, and then other seats, again, that historically haven't been in play that are, again, it's the same states, these swing states that tend to be purple, where anything can happen. So Mo Davis, who you heard from earlier tonight, historically that's been an R+9 seat where the Republican has won by 9 points or more. It is an open seat. The congressman who vacated it is actually Mark Meadows, who is Donald Trump's chief of staff. You all might know him from the news, but he is truly running against a 25-year-old first-time candidate who has never been out in the workforce, who has posted pictures of him smiling and laughing at Hitler's castle. This is really, you can go look on his Instagram. There's also one of him punching a dead tree for really no particular reason. But Mo is currently leading by just a point in this district. You know, you hear these stories and think, well, absolutely, there's no way that an electorate will elect someone like that. But again, going back to the beginning of this presentation, partisanship is such a large driver of vote preference, particularly for this election. So we really are seeing some of these seats that haven't been in play before being in play all the way down to Texas. I know that we just talked about the Senate here, but that Texas Senate seat is in play as well. My firm just did an internal that was released publicly that had Texas tied. That is totally remarkable among likely voters, 48-48. So definitely there are lots of things that are in play where they historically haven't been before. And, you know, of course, the ideal will be to flip the presidency, expand the House, and also pick up the Senate as well. We'd have the opportunity to have one of the most progressive agendas in history, and it would really be remarkable with all the work that we would be potentially able to do. So going back to this presidential election, I don't know about y'all, but this map gave me a little bit of heartburn. I don't like to relive it very often. But this is how the Electoral College broke out in 2016. So of course we know, as we've heard time and time again, that Trump won the electoral vote and lost the popular vote. So, you know, as a pollster, I'm often asked, well, why were the polls wrong? What did, you know, how have you made an adjustment since 2016? And certainly we've developed new and different types of data collection and methodologies to go forward. But sort of the big spoiler for folks is the public polling that is meant to gauge the popular vote has almost never deviated from the Electoral College. And Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. The polls were actually correct. I just saw some national polls were even as close as 0.3%. You can see 6% nationwide went for a third party. And certainly when we look at the margins, and Chris mentioned this earlier, these margins are narrow. We had more folks in Michigan blank the top of the ballot than Trump lost by. Roughly 22,000 Michiganders blanked the top of the ballot, and Trump won by 10,000 votes. So there are lots of states in play in 2020 that perhaps weren't in 2016. But the other thing you can see here is, as a lot of land, we need to get fewer states than Trump does. In today's national head-to-head, you know, this race looks like we can all go home, right? Biden, as of today, is up 10 points. That's well outside the margin of error for reliable national polling. And Trump is at just about 42%. Something I always tell folks when I'm looking at national polls, particularly the presidential polling, is look at where Trump is and where he's been. Trump has been in the low 40s for months, even when he's been able to garner a little bit more support. As you can see in that graph over time, he's really stayed in the low 40s since basically the coronavirus started, and that hasn't moved at all. Whereas you can see, while it's marginal and a small increase, Joe Biden has been able to continue to increase and grow his support and nudge himself over that 50% threshold that's so important. This is what the 2020 Electoral College map could look like. You know, certainly I think one big lesson that all Democrats learned is that we need to look at states individually and in and of themselves, and, you know, not focus so much on the national, the popular vote. So, you know, there's lots of states that are in play here. 126 electoral votes coming from swing states: Arizona, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and of course, my home state of Florida. I am a South Shore lady, and I have been for quite some time now, but I am from Florida, so we can certainly save some Florida man stories for after the presentation. But, you know, there's still quite a few states and votes that are outstanding there that we'll need in order to be successful this year. Massachusetts is not one of them. So I just thought you might be a little interested in where we've been historically. And, you know, certainly, as I mentioned at the top, candidates like Meg and other local folks really do need our support. And I encourage you to do that. But, when it comes to the presidential in 2016, Clinton took Trump by 2-1. Almost 40 points ahead in the polls. Biden is currently of Trump in Massachusetts as of today. So there is a big, a big strong lead, and we can see even in some of the parts of our state that are traditionally more swingy, which includes parts of the South Shore, primarily Plymouth County and some other places as well, where Clinton was closer. 40 to 50%. You can see that light blue here in our backyard as we approach Cape Cod. We're still overperforming when you look at the popular vote nationwide. So, Massachusetts continues. It was a stronghold in 16 and continues to be one in 2020. But when we're looking for bellwethers nationwide, here are a couple that might be of interest. Some of which I've done my own research in this year, so I'm happy to talk about that. But Wisconsin and Michigan, these places in the Midwest, they really have showed a pretty healthy spread statewide when it comes to support for Biden. 7 points in Wisconsin as of today, almost 8 points in Michigan as of today. But here's some things that are really complicated about surveying these states. They don't have party registration. So when we as pollsters go in to model, we really don't know what it's supposed to look like. In the same way that we might be able to in Massachusetts. We know there are, X number of Democrats, X number of Republicans, and X number of unenrolled voters statewide in Massachusetts. We don't know that in Wisconsin. So when we see these big Democratic leads, certainly we put a lot of effort into feeding our models to make sure that they're accurate. But there's a lot of factors that go into that lead, and certainly we can't go home yet. It's not time to lay down yet. But including the swing states of Florida and North Carolina, more in the South, we're seeing that lead really narrow. The same is true in Arizona. Out there in the Mountain West, these are tight races. These are within the margin of error. I'm doing a lot of statewide work in Florida, and I can tell you that it's volatile. It changes every day, and there's definitely anything can happen. And we'll talk about some of the things that have happened. I thought this map was interesting, although I'm usually not a total 538 subscriber. But here are the 3 most likely scenarios for a Trump win when it comes to the Electoral College. And you can see how many more states Republicans and Trump have to pick up in order to win the necessary votes. You can see in every single one it includes, in these models, it includes Florida and Texas. Now, when you look at a Biden win, you can see that there's a lot more variety in terms of what swing states we can possibly win and still pick up the presidency. Some of these projections have Florida included and some of them do not. It is my personal and professional hot take, although some of my colleagues do disagree with me, that I believe that if Joe Biden wins Florida, this thing is over and done with. If he does not win Florida, that doesn't mean that we can't still win, but it does open a path for Trump. So my personal perspective is keep your eye on Florida, but there are a lot of other states that could be in the mix, and these include, states that historically go for Democrats, as well as some swing states like Pennsylvania, Arizona, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So lots of different combinations here. So we all know that Tuesday night is going to be a wild ride. Not to trigger anybody, but yes, we have seen this before, right? So all of this information that I've given you seems really positive and really rosy. This day, or actually it was the 18th, I don't think there was information from the 20th, but on the 18th, Tuesday, October 18th in 2016, Hillary Clinton was projected to win with a 91% chance. So if that election were held in 2016, data says that she, 91 times out of 100 would have won. When we look at the final polling average, and remember I was saying earlier, keep your eye on where Trump's been. The final polling average, Trump had been in that 42%. Clinton had been right around 45, and there had been that share of undecided. And remember, we did have 6%, which is a whopper of a number, who picked neither candidate, really making a difference here. But the popular vote was totally inverted. Clinton was at 48%, and Trump was at 45%. So again, the polls weren't necessarily wrong, but they were just gauging the popular vote as opposed to the Electoral College. So, we've seen this before where things feel really good and we feel really comfortable heading into election day. But what we saw at the state level, and one big criticism of polling has been, in 2016, we really didn't do enough state level polling. And I do think that in 2020, we've really remedied this. But when we look at the state level polling, you can see that the average difference in that polling and in some of these 7 key swing states was just about a point. We look at Clinton's support in some of these places that she lost, and it was very close to what happened in the polling. So, again, keeping your eyes on those state level polls is going to be really important when we start to look at these key states as the race tightens and over the course of the next 14 days, things continue to engage. So what happens, right, in between, October 18th of 2016 and election day of 2016, and what could happen to us in the next 14 days. So there's a term in politics, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, called the October surprise. It's essentially when there's some big scandal or derailment that happens in the last few days of an election that's meant to, either discourage folks from showing up to vote if they haven't already, or even change their vote if they're the very, very, very small percentage of folks who are truly undecided or open to persuasion. So if we even just look at some of these things that happened in recent, I don't know if any of y'all remember this. I remember it very clearly watching it from my apartment in Boston. When the video was leaked of Mitt Romney talking about the 47%. In 2016, of course, it was all of the Access Hollywood, the email leaks, and the Comey letter. The Comey letter, there's been a lot of ink spilled about this, but it was released on October 28th of 2016, and there was a major shift in sentiment once this happened. So, as an anecdote for what could happen to us in the next 14 days, it feels like, we've run this very long race and we're at the end of it. But in 14 days, a lot can happen, and that's what happened in 2016. When this Comey letter dropped, Clinton, who had held a pretty comfortable lead up until that point, really cratered. It completely dropped. This letter was detrimental. I know that there are folks out there that disagree with me, but I agree with the numbers here. And we saw, a major cratering in her support overall. And then we saw, an increase in that coverage as well. So you can see that, she was really only being covered by scandal related coverage, 14% in those last 2 weeks of October. Following the letter, it rocketed all the way up to 37% of the coverage about her was focused on scandals. Late shifts in the battleground states. So looking at some of those swing states, those battleground states that are pivotal for Democratic wins, there were major shifts after October 28th. So again, today is only the 20th. Like, this would be 8 days from now if something like this happened again, which I don't know about y'all, but in COVID lifetime, that seems like 100 years per day. So, but truly, there were some major shifts in these polls, and you can see it did actually make a difference on states that she was able to pick up and win and states that she wasn't. So this is all only to say, don't sleep on an October surprise this year, even though it feels like every day of 2020 has been an October surprise. But we've had quite a bit of things that have happened over the course of this year, or even just the last couple of weeks. If we think about the president disclosing that he's had COVID, folks in his circle, contracting the virus. We have a Supreme Court nominee being rammed through at the last minute. I mean, there's just a lot that can happen in between today and November 3rd. So hopefully I haven't sufficiently scared all of y'all off at this point. But looking ahead to Election Day, there are a couple things to watch. We talked about Florida. Florida polling closes at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Florida does have early vote and vote by mail, and it is processed before Election Day. So this is really good news. It is very likely that we will know what direction Florida goes in on election night. Other states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, these results are going to start off strong for Trump. If y'all have not heard anything from this presentation, hear this. In all of the polling that we have done nationwide in swing states and regular Democratic stronghold states, including Massachusetts, vote method is partisan. Democrats are voting by mail and they are voting early. Republicans are holding out to vote early in person on election day. When we see election night returns, they're going to come from Republicans who voted on the day of, and it could potentially look very bad. But hang in there, stay strong. We know that Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, states that are trending for Biden, that are showing up really strong in early vote and vote by mail, they cannot start counting these votes until election day. If you followed anything that happened in the primaries in New York, what's happened in the wake of COVID is that a lot of legislation has been passed that updates the way that we're able to vote, but there are little pieces of it that are still antiquated, like not being able to open up the ballots that are holding us back. So we in Massachusetts did a very good job at counting votes, counting early votes, and vote by mail. There are other states that struggled because their laws haven't caught up with one another. New York is just a good example because it took almost over a month for us to really know what happened in the New York primaries. They've certainly done a lot to iron the process out, but I think we can expect to see, you know, a big lag, particularly with these huge early voting and vote by mail numbers that we're watching come in from these other states. And then of course, our neighbors to the north, Maine, their polls close at 8 p.m. Competitive second congressional district race, and also of course the U.S. Senate race up in Maine. These are the things that I'm looking for as a bellwether, and the things that I hopefully will help me sleep at night if we don't know the way that the election has come down. But I know that's been a lot of information. I'm happy to stop here and take some questions. I also think I went over my time. Sorry, Chris. But I saw some chat questions. Oh, here we go. Awesome. So I will stop chatting. I'm happy to take some questions if we have time. And most of all, you know, thank y'all for having me and for all of the work that you're doing to make sure that we don't have another repeat of 2016.
Jane, I think in your introduction probably should have explained that you get paid to tell the hard truth and not sugarcoat it. I'm getting some texts from people that are pretty terrified based on what you said. If folks have questions for Jane, if you want to just raise your hand, we'll call on you and I'll activate your microphone. Oh, we've got Alice. Alice, you'll be asked to unmute and go ahead once your mic's on.
Thanks, Chris. My question is that we've been getting requests, you know, from different states to be calling, and one of the states that sent us some information is Pennsylvania. So I guess my question is, what are the best states that we should be calling? Florida, Pennsylvania?
Absolutely. I mean, anywhere that you're calling into swing states is going to make a big difference. You know, certainly we can't sleep on any of these purple states, these battleground states that are important. I would certainly put Pennsylvania among them. Florida, I think, is going to be critical. Truly one of the most important states. Arizona as well, North Carolina, where they have a little bit more of an uphill battle. Those are all the places that I would put your efforts, but really you should call whatever, like, swing state. I do truly believe that we as Massachusetts Democrats do have a responsibility to our siblings in other states to help them, right? You know, our state will go blue. So whatever swing state speaks to you, that's where I put my effort, where you can talk confidently to voters. If you have a little bit of relatability, you know, I've been doing work with voters in my home state of Florida because I'm from there. You know, that's really what's going to make the difference.
Thank you.
Great question. Thank you.
Thanks, Alice. Any other questions for Jane?
There was a question in the chat about research on what's most effective: phone calls, postcards, lawn signs, holding signs, live social media, or donating. There has been a ton of research, Julie. That's a great question. Truly, what is the most effective is direct voter contact. So that can be, you know, certainly outside of COVID, it's knocking doors, but also phone calls are extremely important. You know, any sort of like relational organizing that Sam and Meg were talking about, but really looking at, working with the campaigns on what they've predetermined as, persuadable people, and reaching out to those folks and making sure not only that they're convinced to vote for the candidate, but that they're going to turn out to vote. I'm sure you've seen this number quite a bit, but actually the person that won in 2016 were people not voting. So we want to make sure that we're turning out Democrats or unenrolled or independents in other states that are there for Biden. Other things like visibility, yard signs, things like that do have less effectiveness. One of the least effective campaign activities are the robocalls that come into homes. There's actually research that shows those are only effective in places that have high English as a second language speakers that are citizens who are able to vote, and when that call comes from a community leader. So, while certainly campaigns engage in all of these activities, the research really shows that the best way to get a voter to vote is to have another person call them and ask them to. So that's what tends to be most effective. Celia asked, how has methodology or analysis changed since 2016? Celia, girl, I'm happy to talk offline. It has changed substantially. I will spend the rest of this call talking about it. But truly, I do think, we've made a lot of changes methodologically. One thing that we've done, particularly in communities where there's a high level of folks who prefer another language other than English, is to make sure that we're doing all of our outreach to those folks in their preferred language and through means other than traditional telephone polling or online polling. Text to web methodology, where you get a text message and you click it and it takes you to a website, is something that we've utilized more than ever this cycle, because it's been way more representative, particularly of communities of color and voters who speak primarily a language other than English. The other thing that we've had to contend with this year are the swaths of newly registered voters. So we've really adjusted our models to make sure that we have those folks in there as well. Chris, I'm going to keep answering these questions if that is okay.
Yeah, maybe if we do one more question, and then we got some organizers on that I know are in the midst of call time, so we're going to toss it over to them after your next question.
Sure. And also too, I can drop my email in the chat. I would love to talk to any of you at any time. I am here on the South Shore. But somebody asked, texting voters in swing states, effective that method is versus making calls. I don't have any research on that, but I know that both are direct voter contacts, so they're highly effective. If texting is what gets you excited, I encourage you to keep it up. Definitely keep doing that direct voter contact. With that, I will stop answering questions, but I'm happy to.
Actually, Jane, if you have any information on that last question about postcards, I think there's a lot of folks interested in postcards here. If you have any insight into that.
Yeah, I mean, postcards, I think the best thing that we can be doing is making calls. But ultimately, look, folks, if you are doing direct voter contact in other states, that's what you want to be doing. If the only thing you feel comfortable doing is writing postcards, don't write them to Worcester, write them to South Carolina. But the best thing that we can do is make calls. That is full stop. The best thing that we can do, make those calls, make them into swing states. That's what's going to make a difference.